And so, after a great deal of thought and a whole lot of prayer, we are so honored to have you join with us here today as we officially announce that we are running to serve as your President of the United States of America.
Well, that was Scott Walker announcing that we, the royal we, I presume, was running for president. I'm Greg Borowski. We're here to talk now about Governor Scott Walker's announcement last night with Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, who joins us in the flesh today, and Dan Bice, our watchdog columnist.
As usual, in the flesh.
As usual, in the flesh. So let's break it down into two things. There's sort of the content of the speech, the words and the material, and then his delivery. So let's start with the content. What struck you about the content of that speech?
Well, a lot of familiar themes that we've been hearing, if you've been hearing him speak all along. I mean, one of the interesting things was what wasn't in the speech. I mean, there was no mention of immigration, which is an issue that's tripped him up, and he's been admittedly changed his position on. He tread very lightly on social issues. There were some glancing references to abortion and no mention of the same-sex marriage issue, and I think that's an indication of the fact that he doesn't want those kinds of issues to be his defining issues in his bid for the presidency.
What struck you, Dan?
One, the heavy emphasis on foreign policy. The last third of his speech was on foreign policy, an area where he's, lacks the experience that some of his opponents do, and at the same time that it did not have those red meat issues, it was still a very strong, sort of bold speech. It's not hiding anything. He's a polarizing figure who has a polarizing agenda, and that's what he's offering in this election.
He used the word fight, I think, 14 times, and he used the word win or a variation of that 10 times. So that was the single takeaway I think he wanted for people was, and really been the theme of his campaign, I'm a fighter, I'm a winner. Republican voters, you don't have to choose between fighting and winning. You can have it both.
And I think you got the real Scott Walker there. That was, I mean, he's very friendly, affable, a little confident, and also a little sweaty because it's very hot there. But at the same time, it is a message that's going to divide people, and so that's what he's been as governor. He is a friendly, affable, accessible guy. At the same time, he's beloved and hated in Wisconsin because of that message.
Let's talk a little bit about the delivery, because he was out there without a tie, without a sport coat, or without a podium even,
or a teleprompter. I mean,
what was he trying to get across, or how did it come across?
I don't know if I've ever seen a major speech like that where the speaker distributed a written text, but then didn't either read from it or use a teleprompter. So he was basically delivering the speech off the cuff as he normally does, but he also had to stick to the sentence-by-sentence structure of this written speech. It's really, really hard to do that, and I actually think he did amazingly well when you consider how hard that is to do, but I think he does better when he's not trying to stick to a written text. And so I think to the degree that the speech was a little the delivery was a little tentative at times, it was because he was trying to stick to the structure of a prepared text, even though he wasn't reading from it.
Here in Wisconsin, the last time we heard him speak in a dramatic or focused Senate was after his victory last fall. Has he improved a lot since then? I mean, just the delivery.
It was still impressive at the same time to do that. And you said keep to the text. He was like 80 to 90% of the time on the text. And you could tell when he thought he hit a line. He did this sort of, it was a new thing. I haven't seen him do this, where he nods his head like, yeah, I nailed that line. And when people were applauding, it used to be the smirk. He used to come out and he would smirk when he thought he did pretty well. But he's grown a great deal as a speaker over the last 5 years. He used to think in terms of concepts, I think, and would leap from concept to concept. But this was clearly a speech that he knew sentence by sentence. And a couple of times he forgot a line, remembered it, and went back. So this has been something he's been working on for a good
just one other point. I think he's got a lot left to prove about his capacity as a presidential candidate. But one thing that he has shown already, starting in Iowa 6 months ago, is that he can give a speech that energizes and animates and excites a Republican crowd.
Well, the advantage is the floor is, I mean, the expectations are not great. Everyone thinks he's bland, boring, Midwestern, whatever. So when he does pretty well in his speech, people respond fairly well to
let's
it.
see, this isn't, of course, going to be a one-time speech. He's going to use variations of this. He already has on the stump. How do you think this plays with voters now in Nevada and South Carolina and New Hampshire and Iowa, where he's headed already this week?
Was there one thing he's really trying to do, and that really was striking about the program last night, not just the speech, but everything that preceded the speech, where there were testimonials and videos, was they're hitting the recall story so hard. And it's not just, as he told me on Sunday, about reminding people there was a recall, but it's about reminding people about the nature of the recall and how brutal it was and how intense it was, because he wants to tell the story of all the acute pressure that he and his family were under. He wants to talk about the death threats. The opposition in these videos and in these testimonials last night was painted as crazed and unhinged and out to get Scott Walker, and they think that resonates with Republican voters.
But it doesn't. It's not a message for Wisconsin, clearly, because nearly half the people in Wisconsin opposed him, and a lot of people signed the recall petition. So, you know, this recall, the opposition gets worse and worse each time they tell the story. You would think, you know, that they were besieged daily. And
well, you get the impression they've got a sign in their room like Bill Clinton had, the economy, stupid things. It's the recall thing. So how key, finally, as our last question, is this next stretch for him? So he's waiting, he's introduced himself again.
So if you look back at the last 6 months, he was catapulted by the speech in Iowa in January. Ton of publicity they weren't entirely prepared for, had some stumbles, and since then, you know, he's come back down to earth. He's sort of in the middle of this big giant cluster in the national polling. He was higher before, and so I think he does have an opportunity to get a bump out of this, especially with someone like Donald Trump, you know, carving out 10% of the vote. That's not going to last. So I think he'll get a bump out of this. He's getting a ton of attention and publicity. He did this big thing with ABC News. Probably 8 or 9 million people saw it last night. So, and the announcement tour is being heavily covered. So I think he has a chance to kind of regain a little bit of the momentum that he really couldn't sustain over the invisible primary.
Well, according to the tracking information, he's been to Iowa, South Carolina, and New Hampshire less often than any of the other 14 candidates running for president. So he's going to hit those places hard now. The budget's signed. He doesn't have a lot of obligations here. So he can take the message and go to those places frequently. And one thing we do see in Wisconsin is when he's out and he's visible, he tends to do much better in his polling numbers. So he's going to take this message. And some of this message, as you said, been around for a long time, this independence, dependence thing on government. He's been doing that message for about 4 years or so. So it's a message that he knows pretty well.
All right. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for now. There'll be a lot more to chew over as this campaign goes forward. So thank you.